More rankings. Where do Nebraska players, including Dylan Raiola, fit into the Locked On Top 100?
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome everybody. It's Wednesday. Connor Happer here from 1620 The Zone. Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Nebraska's on to day number 3 at preseason camp. There will be some media availability tomorrow. Dana Holgerson and Dakiel Shorts at least, and then some players will be speaking. So we'll have some reaction to that as we go on throughout the week and into next week. And remember, camp is a marathon, not a sprint. So we're just in the first couple K here as we get off and running.
Yes. 2 days in. Today is day 3. We are 1 month away now from the first Saturday of the college football season. Week 1 is 1 month away. Of course, Nebraska's already crossed that threshold and did on Monday, being the 1 week, the 1 week point. The 1 month point from away from the first game, and that's why the Huskers started camp a couple of days earlier than many teams around the country who are getting going today as we record this podcast. This week, today, in fact. Locked On has released a list of college football players voted on by the hosts of podcasts on this network to make up the Locked On Top 100. This is the first time ever for this kind of an endeavor. So nice job to everyone involved with this. And we get a look at this list, Connor. We get a look at the list, and naturally, we want to page through it and tell you a little bit about who's on it, who you might see in Nebraska games this year. And of course, where are the Huskers on this list? Tell us.
Yeah. So let's get a little behind the scenes first. Full disclosure. I nominated just the 2 Huskers that appeared on this list for the list. Nobody got left out that we submitted for the top 100. I could have probably added a 3rd or a 4th, and maybe they'd be on it. But I put in that I thought Dylan Raiola and Dane Key were both worthy of being top 100 college football players. And according to the Locked On, the rest of the podcast hosts on the network, they're on the list, like you said, Mitch, but not by much. They're at the very bottom of the list, in the bottom 10. So Dane Key shows up in this list, the transfer wide receiver from Kentucky, should be Nebraska's, ex-receiver basically this year. 91 in the top 100, number 91. Dylan Raiola, Nebraska's quarterback, comes in at 99 on the list out of, once again, 100. So what's your initial reaction to that?
99 out of 100. Okay, when you see that, I think just because of where he's at, it's like, all right, here we go again. People don't want to give Dylan Raiola credit for being the only true freshman in the Power 4 last year to start all 13 games. People don't want to give him credit for some of the things that we saw him do at points during the season last year. Now, it was not a consistent 13-game thing with Dylan, but when he was good, he was very good early in the season against Wisconsin, at a few other points in the Big Ten. But then you step back and you say, all right, this is the top 100 players in college football. And if you're on this list, whether you're 99 or 100 or you're in the 20s, like, you are receiving a fair amount of respect. We remember, and we'll talk about Dylan specifically later on in the show, I think, and what may be the dynamic at work here that lands him at number 99. But we remember that The Athletic put Dylan on its list of ranking 1 through 136 quarterbacks at number 40 overall among quarterbacks. So That would not get him in the top 100. I think this is more appropriate with where Dylan Raiola should be. When you look at some of the quarterbacks who are ahead of him on this list, maybe you will scratch your head, change your opinion, but this is what it is going into year 2 for him. And I think this is what it is for Nebraska. The perception is that Nebraska lacks star power.
Yeah.
And I feel that at this stage in Matt Rhule's push to get Nebraska back in the quest by Nebraska over the past 20 years, which featured a lot of disappointment, the inclination nationally is to overlook Nebraska, is to underestimate players on Nebraska's roster, to assume until you see otherwise that they're going to underachieve.
Yeah. And that's okay. Like, I think that's part of the deal here. And for the record, I do think Nebraska lacks a little bit of star power. Now it's possible that these guys turn into that over a period of time, especially, the two that we're talking about on this list. Maybe they turn into those stars this year, but I feel like where Matt Rhule is at in building this program, from like an internal standpoint, not perception wise on the outside looking in, is that, the first year and the first 2 years were kind of about getting them in the right place, doing the right things, setting that standard. And as I always put it, raising the floor of Nebraska football. I think they've done that. I think they've raised the floor of Nebraska football, and you don't need like superstar players to do that. You just have to have a bunch of guys out there, in the right place and doing the right thing, so to speak. So now it's time to make the jump. I think once you have that standard, and once you have that base laid, then you really are going to start wondering at some point during the season, why aren't our players beating their players one-on-one? You know what I mean? And just stuff like that. That's where it really shows. It's guys on this list can kind of take over games and change the course of individual games, which changes the course of your season.
I'm going to inquire with the Locked On leadership if we can change the name of this podcast to Raising the Floor.
Raising the floor. I think the floor's been raised. Would you disagree with that?
The floor for Nebraska football is higher this year than what it was last year and in 2023. Yeah. If
now you got to raise the ceiling, right?
Right. If you were going to have nominated additional players beyond the two, Dane Key and Dylan Raiola, who made this list at 91 and 99, who would have been next for you to nominate?
Rocco Spindler, probably. That would have been the first one that came to my head, and I think I almost put him on there. And then I was trying to think, if I remember right, we did this a little while ago now. I was trying to think about a guy on defense, and if I felt like somebody could go in there, and I couldn't. The fact that I couldn't come up with anybody immediately probably tells you the answer to that question. But if you were to nominate somebody from Nebraska's defense as a top 100 player in the country, who would you nominate?
Probably Sierra Wright. Not a second team, third team, all Big Ten pick a year ago. So it isn't a slam dunk to sit here and say, oh yeah, like Sierra's the guy. But if there was one player on the Nebraska defense whose accomplishments over the last 2 to 3 years in college football, and it doesn't have to be 2 to 3 years. Can. Arch Manning is on this list at number 40, and he started a couple of games, but over the long term, he hasn't done certainly what somebody like Sierra Wright has done in proving himself in college football. And I understand why Arch Manning is on the list. Like I'm not debating that. I'm not even saying that Sierra Wright, or if you wanted to go somewhere else with the Nebraska defense, I suppose you could do this on potential, and you could put like Vincent Shavers on the list. You could nominate Riley Van Poppel, but those players I don't think have earned it at this point. Like they've shown great promise. Like if you're predicting who might be on this list a year from now, then you start talking about players like that, like Carter Nelson.
So I think the answer to that question, because I agree with you, and I think that's how these lists should be done. What you've produced, and then the players that return. The answer on Nebraska's defense is Marcus Watson Trent. That's the answer. I mean, he was the Sun Belt Defensive Player of the Year last year. He's he probably actually deserves to be on this list.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, if you're talking about accomplishments in college football, he's the guy who I go into the season thinking, if you ask me who's going to lead Nebraska in tackles this year, it is not something that I have to think long about.
No,
I'm going, it's going to be MWT. And it's in part because of the position that he plays, but it's also just that he's proven that he can do that. And he's proven it against teams like Nebraska, when Georgia Southern played Nebraska back in, in 2022. This was yes, that's a long time ago, and he was doing it then, and here he is at Nebraska here in 2025. So, right, you're correct. I think in saying Sierra Wright over Marcus Watson Trent, like I'm showing the bias of Sierra having played in the Power Four for his entire career, having played at USC and proven it there for a period of time, and then having played at Nebraska last year and had a really good second half of the season. You know, Marcus Watson Trent, it's like, oh, he's over there doing it at another level. But certainly he's more accomplished, and he's more accomplished than anyone on the black shirts.
Yeah, all he does is tackle people. Does Watson Trent? It's interesting too. This is actually a really good comparison between those two. This is sort of a weird conversation that we found ourselves in here, but Sierra Wright didn't play a lot at USC, but he's a highly recruited guy, ends up at Nebraska where he didn't play a lot in the first, or it was slow for him because he got here so late, and then had a really good second half of the season, like you said. And we're like, yeah, I'm pretty sure about that guy. Watson Trent, has had 100+ tackles in 3 straight years at Georgia Southern. He's the Sun Belt Defensive Player of the Year last year. And this is the conversation that we're getting into, like who is more worthy of being a top 100 player in football. So it's a learning lesson, and it's a conversation about like what we value in college football. And to be honest with you, I just like whatever level you produce. I don't care if it's at North Dakota State or at Furman or whatever. Like if a dude has got 15, he's caught 15 touchdowns, or he's run for 1,200 yards, or he threw 38 touchdowns. I don't care where it was. Like that's a really good thing. It doesn't mean it's all going to translate to the next level, but especially like a linebacker on defense, there's a pretty good chance it will.
We once saw a linebacker from Fordham collect 31 tackles in a game against Nebraska. Let's come back after the break. I have a question for you about Dane Key as it relates to this list, since you're responsible for him being on it. That is coming up next.
But first, a word from our friends at 5 Hour Energy. Time to fuel up and turn it up with 5 Hour Energy Transfusion, bringing the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, of course, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're seeking birdies or just making memories with friends, that's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Some days on the course, especially when the weather is like what it's been around here lately, it's a grind, and you need that extra boost to stay sharp and energized. So you have some options. You can get the transfusion from the clubhouse, or you can get the more immediate, and that'll dehydrate you, by the way, in the long run. You could get the immediate 5 hour energy transfusion shot that's going on right now and that we're talking about. Boom! All of a sudden, you're hitting greens from 150 out on a very, very, very consistent basis. That's what it could do for you. Golf, if you're not good, is all about good times with good people. It's all about making good shots as well, and good flavors. The grape, ginger, lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without chasing down the Bev card. This offer is valid only until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. So whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion flavored 5 Hour Energy shots today.
Back on this Wednesday, Locked On Nebraska podcast, Mitch Sherman of The Athletic, Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone with you. Much more later in this show on the Locked On Top 100. We'll get into a conversation about Dylan Raiola, the quarterback, along with a look at who on the Nebraska schedule is on the list ahead or behind some of the Nebraska players that we see there. A reminder that as preseason camp goes on this month, we will update and provide our reaction and analysis to any injury news in the preseason camp only as it becomes official. So if it's announced by the school, presumably the head coach, he will talk again on Saturday. We could hear from him on Thursday. He may stop into the media room for a moment, or if a player announces it himself. So if you see things that are floating around on social media, until it's known, until it's been reported or become official, we'll kind of stay away from that area.
A great note, Mitch. What a great note by you.
Right. So Saturday night in the stadium, as I continue to preview what's up for the rest of the week, practice is open to the ticket buying public. That will be interesting to get a look at what Nebraska is doing one full week into preseason camp. This is one of the 1890 backed events that will help Nebraska's collective gather funds in order to reward Nebraska football players for their greatness, their achievements, their endorsement opportunities. So on Thursday, as you mentioned, Connor, we're going to get Dana Holgorsen, Dakeil Shorts, likely a few players. I suspect that we'll hear from a wide receiver or two, maybe Jacory Barney. Did you hear what Matt Rhule had to say on Monday about Jacory Barney? I thought his comments were interesting in saying that Jacory changed the entire vibe around Nebraska's field goal kick team with the energy that he brought to practice when the Huskers went through that portion of drills. He gave Jacory even some credit for John Hull's turnaround as this and emergence as the second half of the season got underway, just because of how Jacory livened up that portion of practice. Thought that had a lot to say about the impact that he can have, not just with his feet and his athletic skills, but just with the personality that he brings to the Nebraska roster.
Every team needs an energy guy, right? You know, like it feels like Nebraska has their guy in Jacory Barney, which is, I think, matches his style of play a little bit as well. He's kind of an electric receiver, and we have not probably talked about him nearly enough this offseason because we've been focused on the other two transfers that they brought in. But I mean, if he takes a jump off after an awesome freshman year, then we're talking about a pretty dynamic receiver core for Nebraska this year. But I love that. I love to hear that. There's always that guy on a team, especially on a football team where there's so many guys. It's like, yeah, everybody, Rhule talked about it on Monday. The mood's kind of down, or you go through these just natural lulls in a game or during training camp. Obviously, it's going to happen during training camp because those days get long and hot, and you get hit the same people over and over again, and you do the same thing. There's always one guy who just never turns it off. There's always one guy who's just running around like a psycho the entire time. Sounds like that's Jacory Barney. Love it.
And then another receiver I wanted to mention is Jeremiah Jones. So a lot of people saw Jeremiah Jones on Monday at practice, and it was the first chance to get a look at him because he wasn't there in the spring. He was a late add to the roster, not to the recruiting class. He signed back in December with everybody else, but he finished his spring semester of high school at home in Kentucky, and then came out. Which is different than the majority of Nebraska's true freshman class who were here for the cold of January. Jeremiah did it right, man. He didn't have to worry about Nebraska until it got to be a little bit warmer. So he's 6'4" and 225 pounds, and he looks very much ready to go. Like it's a solid package. He's not he's in shape. And this is a weapon that you see on the practice field for Nebraska running around with that offense that doesn't have a bunch of All-Americans or all Big Ten players like we've documented in this show. And there's a 6'4", 225-pound guy who can run and catch and seemingly do what you need to turn him into a big-time weapon in this offense. So just for some perspective, Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State, who I'm going to put up the top 10 of this list right here. There's the Locked On Top 100. You see Jeremiah Smith, if you're watching with us on YouTube, number 1 on that list. It has a lot more to do with intangibles and his skill set than it does overall skill set than it does just with his size. But when you watch Jeremiah Smith on the field, he looks like a machine, and he looks big and strong and just better than everyone else. He's 6'3", 215 pounds. So what you have with Jeremiah Jones at Nebraska is a bigger body than Jeremiah Smith of Ohio State. We're not saying that he's the next Jeremiah Smith, but you got something to work with there for sure. And I wonder, heading into the second half of the first week of camp, does Nebraska have to find a big role for Jeremiah Jones this year?
I don't think it has to be him. But you're right. I mean, it's tantalizing, right? Like Nebraska just doesn't have guys like that very often. Usually if they have productive receivers, I mean, there's not very many, like, conventionally you look at a Nebraska receiver and say, oh, that guy's probably going to play in the NFL if the production, kind of checks out, like Quincy Enunwa,
felt that way about, right. It felt that way about Isaiah Nair last year.
Yeah. Nair, but the production didn't check out, right? And
right.
So that was the issue with that. So a lot of Nebraska's most successful receivers over the last 10, 15, 20 years have been like super unorthodox in the sense that they were really shifty, they were really fast, they had this excellent feel for the game or whatever it might have been, or they played in a great offense or something like that. So it's definitely interesting when you have like a conventional this guy looks like he could beat somebody on the edge receiver at Nebraska. And not that these other guys on the roster can't, but I don't know that it has to be him. Like I do think you probably need one or two more to establish themselves and identify themselves here during camp to go along with the current, receivers that are in the mix there. Because it's, as I've mentioned this a couple times, like it's a little thin at that spot, but you have confidence in the guys that you have up there right now. So whether it be, more from Quinn Clark or more from Demetrius Bell or more from, Keelan Smith and Cortez Mills, like you're going to have to get somebody to kind of take that spot. And there's no doubt about it. Jeremiah Jones could be that guy.
I predict after Saturday night in the stadium, there will be a lot of conversation about Jeremiah Jones. Whether that means that he's going to be out there getting meaningful reps on August 28th or not, I think that there'll be a lot of conversation about him. Let's very quickly go through on this Locked On Top 100 before we talk about Dylan in the last segment. Players on the Nebraska schedule this year who made it to this list. So you start with Drew Aller, number 20, the Penn State quarterback. He's the highest ranked player on this list that Nebraska will face this year. And then you go to more Penn State. You have defensive end Dennis Sutton at number 22, running back Nick Singleton at number 25. Number 27 is Penn State cornerback A.J. Harris. At number 46, you see Michigan defensive back Rod Moore. He is the only Michigan player in the top 100. According to the Locked On hosts. The only USC player on this list is Mekhi Lemon, the wide receiver, who's there at number 51. And then you have to go all the way down into the 80s to find the next player who's up on the Nebraska schedule, and that is Council Bluffs Lewis Central grad Logan Jones, Iowa's center. Checking in at 95 is Penn State defensive end Zane Durant, and then you see Minnesota running back Darius Taylor and Iowa offensive lineman Jennings Dunker at number 98. So
hard to believe that Darius Taylor, by the way, is still in college. That guy's feels like he's been around for a long time. But yeah, it's not a hugely populated list outside of obviously Penn State. No Illinois guys. That's sort of
Illinois is on there. Illinois, Luke Altmaier's on there, and some others from Illinois, but
obviously Nebraska doesn't
not
play
on the Nebraska schedule this year. Yes,
right. All right,
Indiana's represented.
That's right. Ohio State is obviously hugely represented on the list.
Oregon has a few people on it.
Let's that makes sense. Let's take a quick timeout. We'll zoom in a little bit on the quarterbacks on the list. Compare Dylan Raiola to the rest of those around the country. Coming up next. All right, Dylan Raiola, 99 on the Locked On Top 100 list. He is the 15th quarterback on the list, which, when you frame it up that way, Mitch, like you said earlier, all of a sudden that's not so bad anymore. Behind the likes of, some of the common names like Cade Klubnik, like Garrett Nussmeier from LSU, like Lenora Sellers from South Carolina, like DJ Lagway. We've had this whole DJ Lagway versus Dylan Raiola thing going all offseason, which has kind of been weird. Arch Manning is, he's going to end. You knew he was going to end up on this list.
Yeah, those are the big names. Like, I think those are the guys right now, like we've established going into the season. And you have Carson Beck at Miami, who's a name because of his time at Georgia. But like those guys, Klubnik, Nussmeier.
I would throw Aller.
Aller, you're right. You're right. Yeah. And he fits among them too. But those are the guys, heck, they're all SEC guys. So except for Klubnik, but the other four, there's no parallel to draw here. Never mind anything that I'm saying right now about who these players are. These are the quarterbacks who I think are going to be discussed most often in the early weeks of the season when the conversations come up on College Game Day and Big Noon kickoff. Like, that's a great gauge right there of like, who are people talking about at the quarterback spot?
You always give out your like, there's always like a non-conference Heisman. 3 weeks into the season, as we go into late September, it's like, oh, this guy all of a sudden has like 1,200 yards passing already, and I mean, they've just crushed everybody. So that'll happen. And there is, I will say this too, there is always a guy who enters themselves into the season-long conversation during that portion of the season as well. So it could be anybody in this list or beyond. Then in the next sort of tier of quarterbacks, you have guys like SMU quarterback Kevin Jennings, who's back after going to the college football playoff and not playing well against Penn State last year. Avery Johnson, the K-State quarterback's at 55. I'm sorry, he's at 73. Kevin Jennings is at 55. Fernando Mendoza at Indiana, the transfer from Cal, he's at 74. Luke Altmaier from Illinois is at 79. And Haynes King out of Georgia Tech, once again, another he's still there guy. He is at 89, and then Raiola gets to 99.
I had a question for you that I teased coming out of the first segment, and I'll ask it about Raiola too. What I was going to ask you is if Dane Key had transferred to Georgia in the offseason instead of Nebraska, and Georgia looked at him and offered him, would he be 91 on this list? Would he be higher on this list, or would he not be on the list at all because there's so much talent at Georgia?
Yeah, without knowing like a ton about the specifics of Georgia's wide receiver room, it's hard to say. Like, I don't know. Maybe he would be Georgia's top wide receiver. I'm not sure, but based on the production that he's had so far at Kentucky, he would be a lot of teams in the country's top receiver, just not maybe theirs. So I don't know. I think you could make the case for both sides on that.
Yeah, I think he would be higher. And I'm not saying he would be Georgia's top wide receiver. I think Georgia has 5-star talent at that position, like it does just about every position on the field. I think he would be higher. I think there is a benefit of the doubt that's not often extended to players who choose to transfer to Nebraska. I think Elijah Pritchett, if he had picked a different school, perhaps might find himself on this list. You could say the same thing about Rocco Spindler coming from Notre Dame. So it's just a place that Nebraska has to get to. And I don't even know if it has to get there. Like, if you care about national perception, if you care about, being in the conversation on the morning shows, then that's probably something that matters to you. But for Nebraska, it's about winning games. It's about, it's not about like notoriety. I will say that that stuff to me does impact the conversations that like seep into the consciousness of the college football playoff committee. And we haven't been in a position to have a discussion about whether Nebraska's getting the right amount of respect from the college football playoff committee, because Nebraska just hasn't been there, with the exception of maybe like a week in 2016, has not been there to even be brought up. But if it does, like if Nebraska this year has one loss, or certainly has no losses, and if it has no losses, then it probably doesn't have much of anything to worry about as far as getting respect.
Right.
But if it's got one loss when the first CFP rankings come out, are we going to be having the same conversation about how Nebraska doesn't get the benefit of the doubt because it hasn't won in a long time, and that extends to the CFP committee?
It usually works itself out, like you mentioned there. Like it usually you could pretty much tell who is on the cut line and who's going to be inside the field at the end of the day. So I'm not particularly worried about the committee. I know there's a big war against the committee right now going on that's mostly being waged by Tony Petitti in the Big Ten Conference, which I don't understand. I think the committee's been fine. But yeah, I think if Nebraska, it depends on how it looks. If Nebraska is 9-1 going into Penn State, and they've won every game in the same manner that they did when they were 7-0 in 2016, they won by a touchdown against whoever and barely scraped by Minnesota or whatever it might be, then yeah, there's going to be some people wondering, like, is this real? And we'll see what happens when they get to Penn State, and we'll see what happens when they play Iowa, and maybe they make the Big Ten championship game or whatever it might be, and then you'll figure it out. But once again, at that point, does it matter? If you finish the regular season, if you finish a regular season 10-2 with a loss to Penn State and Michigan or something like that, you're probably going to have a pretty good case to make the college football playoff after that. So there's only so much of it that matters because there's so few spaces to sort of work with as far as the committee is concerned.
Yep. All right. Interesting topic. Something that I'm sure Nebraska and Nebraska fans hope that we revisit in October. Is Nebraska getting enough respect from the college football playoff committee? Are Nebraska football players getting enough respect from people nationally and in the Big Ten to head into this season? You can check out the Locked On Top 100 to see for yourself. But, it is notable to see that there's only one player on there from Michigan, only one player on there from USC. So you can kind of see who Nebraska's peers are on the schedule as we count down the days until August 28th, and Nebraska makes the trek to play Cincinnati, which placed 0 players on this list. So feel good about that, Huskers. All right, that's it for the Locked On Nebraska podcast today. Thanks for making us your first listen. For your second listen, go check out the Portal Show. Brian Smith is there with the latest rumors, portal entries, and information on all of the rapid changes to the college football landscape. Find the Portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.